Hello. And all of these that I watched on YouTube, somebody always introduced the author and had a little whole spiel about everything they'd done and accomplished. So I think it's only fitting that since this is my first book and technically I haven't accomplished anything with it yet, that I'm introducing myself. All right. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to read. There's a part of the book that the chapter ends in Revelations, and I thought it'd be really cool to read that, but it also gives away a lot of very important plot information. And as I was researching how to do a reading, every single person I talked to said, do not give away plot information, that's important. So you didn't have to take my word for it that there's parts of the book that happen in Revelations, and there's also parts of the book that happen across the street at the Landmark Inn, and there's some stuff that happens near the campus and a whole bunch of stuff that happens in Vedic City, among other places. It definitely has lots of Fairfield locales in it, which is kind of fun. But the part I'm going to read is going to take place in Walmart. And I'm going to set this up. I think the vast majority of the people here have actually read the book, so this will be for the people that haven't. I'm just going to read the back of the book because it's the easiest way to set it up. And then I'm going to set up the actual scene that I'm going to read. After the recent election, this might feel a lot more prevalent and relevant to some of you. And some of you might just be like, what are you talking about? All right, so the end of the world as we know it didn't just happen in a single incident, like flipping a switch or dropping a bomb. It came up on us slowly, like cancer, like global warming, like an asteroid from hundreds of millions of miles away. It crept in and anchored itself in motion before we knew what was happening. By the time we did know anything, it was already too late. Berserkers, as they've come to be known, can be anyone, a stranger, a friend, a loved one. You could even be one yourself and not know it until you wake up covered in blood, surrounded by the bodies of your victims, and spitting out your own teeth. Welcome to the long apocalypse. Pull up a chair and make yourself comfortable. The world has been ending for a while now, but it still has a long way to go. So, the book is divided between two stories. There's a father who is in jail, who you don't need to know anything about because he's not part of what I'm going to read. And then there's his two daughters who have been shipped off to Iowa when he goes to jail. And the oldest of those daughters is named Jennifer, and she is a berserker, secretly. And her younger sister is Bobby Lee, and as far as we know, she is just a normal little girl. Although after what I'm about to read, she will definitely not be considered normal, though she won't be a berserker. If you want to know what a berserker is, just imagine the Incredible Hulk without the green and a lot more angry. That's basically all you got to know. So there's a few other people in this scene. There's a boy named Jimmy who is Jennifer's boyfriend to be. They still hate each other at this point. And there's a whole group of older guys who are important later on, but they don't really matter so much in this scene. Just know that there's one of them, Ace, who is kind of a tracker, hunter type person. There's an older gentleman named Cooperman, and then there's a guy named JP. And with that, I guess I should really set this up a little better. by saying that, so this is a long time after the shit has hit the fan. Fairfield is dark. There's no power except for the few places that have some solar power going on. And the majority of the people here are gone and everything's been looted and whatnot. But Walmart, being what it is, still has a bunch of fairly useless stuff in it. So it's like a field trip excursion to go to Walmart for these kids. Jennifer is 16 and Bobby Lee is 12, and they're just going as like a field trip. It's not like a mission or anything. And they have been in there for a little while, and Bobby Lee has disappeared. And that is where we're going to pick up. Bobby Lee! Jen screamed as she searched frantically down the near-empty sporting goods aisle, with Jimmy, JP, Ace, and Cooperman hot on her heels, their guns drawn, trying to cover her. The screaming had stopped before they'd been able to determine where exactly it was coming from, and now they were just haphazardly going through the store. It hadn't sounded like the screams of a little girl, but a person's screams, real screams, never sounded like folks thought they would. Grown men sounded like little girls sounded like grown men. Bobby Lee was gone. Somebody was screaming. Jen found it hard to wrap her head around the possibility that it wasn't her sister's cries they'd heard. "Maybe we should split up," one of the guys behind her said. She was working so hard to keep herself under control that she couldn't tell who it had been, but she thought it must have been JP, because he was the only one stupid enough to suggest something like that. Cooperman must have agreed with her. "Not unless you want us all to die," the old man said. "This is a big store, Cooperman." "Exactly." Jen turned down the next aisle and froze. "This way," she said. Bloody footprints were all over the floor. They were fresh, small. They had to be Bobby Lee's. She followed them to the back of the store, to a door that said authorized personnel only. When she finally made out a complete footprint, she realized she'd misread the tracks. Fuck! She should have let Ace lead. He was the fucking tracker. What the hell was she doing? Fuck! This was the way Bobby Lee had come from, not the way she was going. But that was probably a good thing, Jen realized. She remembered Uncle Alan's lessons on how to defend themselves with the karambit knives he'd been given. A knife she herself had strapped to her back at that very moment and had spent every day since her uncle had been murdered dreading having to use. She never asked Bobby Lee if she was carrying hers, but of course she would be. Bobby Lee had taken those lessons to heart. Uncle Alan had scared the shit out of her, but she'd listened, through tears at times, but never without complete attention. Jennifer suddenly wished she'd listened better herself, because whatever had just happened, her little sister had fought back and was now alive because of it. Probably. Maybe. Unless it was Bobby Lee's own blood that she was tracking all over the store. The pride she felt a second ago flickered like a fluorescent light bulb that needed to be changed. Her mind jigged and jogged through scenarios of what could have happened. She let the images come. She didn't hold on to them. As long as they flowed through her and then out, she'd be fine. If she grabbed one and let her mind nurture it and grow it into an obsession, she'd lose it. She'd berserk out. She still had hope now, so she let that hope calm her mind and let the rest of her thoughts and emotions just run through her like water in a river. Her sudden turn as she reversed directions caused her to collide with Ace, who had been right on her heels, trying to tell her she was probably going the wrong way the whole time. The collision knocked the sawed-off shotgun he carried out of his hands onto the floor. "We're going the wrong way," she said. "That's what I was trying to tell you." Jimmy tried to give her a reassuring smile as she passed him, retracing her steps, but she ignored it. Maybe he wasn't such an asshole, she thought, but until they found her sister, she didn't give a shit about whether or not she misjudged him. No matter how good-looking he was, or that her heart tingled a little bit when her eyes met his. But even though she didn't smile back at him, their eyes still locked. And in that connection, what had been nothing but a mixed bag of teenage hormones suddenly became something else. 7 minutes before they found Bobby Lee, Jennifer and Jimmy fell in love, though it would still take a long time for them to realize it, and even longer to actually accept it. They finally came upon the girl in the hair care aisle and froze, the way someone would if they'd spotted Bigfoot in the woods. The little girl's clothes were soaked with blood. Her hair was matted to her face. She had a cart with her, and in it were jumper skirts, the same ones they'd seen earlier, as well as several pairs of Mary Janes, a couple pairs of knee-high stockings, and some makeup. The 2 spiked black dog collars were the only particularly odd items in the pile of goods. It would have been a cute scene, if not for the blood and the axe she was holding so tightly in her hands that her knuckles were right. Bobby Lee turned and looked at them. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. It was hard to tell if she really saw them at all. "Bobby Lee?" Jen asked, not sure what she should say or how she should proceed. She could tell the little girl had been traumatized, but she didn't look physically hurt. In fact, it looked like the blood she was covered in all belonged to somebody else. Her clothing wasn't ripped or cut, just very bloody. Bobby Lee looked at her for a couple of seconds, but it felt like she was looking through her, or past her, or... Jen didn't know exactly how to interpret that look. It was cold. That was all she could nail down in her mind. Cooperman knew it, though. It was the look folks got after they killed somebody, justified or not. It was the look that comes only after a person has realized that there really is no such thing as sanctity of life. That killing is just another thing a person can do, like eating a cupcake. It was hard to see that look in such a little girl, but he preferred it overwhelmingly to the looks girls usually had after somebody snatched them. The one that came after a girl had been violated for the first time. The one that meant she'd internalized the violence of the rape to the point she'd never see herself as anything more than the human-shaped piece of meat she'd been treated like. Bobby Lee had fought back, and somehow she'd won. And while yes, the little girl would never be the same again, she was still whole, unbroken. The old man wanted to cry in relief, rush to her and pull her into his arms, but he didn't. He knew better. Instead, he nodded to Jen to approach her sister, and with a look told the rest of the men to keep back. Bobby Lee watched all this without any response of any kind. Jen took a step towards her, desperately trying to think of the right thing to say, but coming up with nothing, as her sister went back to what she'd been doing when they found her, looking at hair dye. "You find anything good?" Jen asked softly, immediately wishing she'd said just about any of the other things she thought about saying before she decided to say that. Bobby Lee ignored her. Jen didn't know what to say next, so she just approached her slowly and silently. "Thinking about a color change, dude?" the big sister asked the little one. "I want black, but they don't have black." Jen looked at the boxes of hair dye. There were at least 7 different kinds of black. What the fuck was Bobby Lee talking about? "What about this?" she asked, showing her sister a box of Revlon that said soft black. "I don't want soft. I want black." Jim pulled down the box next to it. "Blue black?" "No, black." "Okay, well, I'm sure they have one that's just black," Jen said, totally confused about what was going on in her little sister's head and terrified of finding the answer at the same time. "This one says just black," Jen said, pulling down a box of Clairol and handing it to her sister. Watching them from the edge of the aisle, Jimmy turned to Ace and asked what he thought they were doing. Ace told him he had no idea. Cooperman told them both to shut up. "That looks good, thanks," Bobby Lee said, putting the box in her cart. "I see you got a couple of new outfits there, dude." Bobby Lee looked at her sister with a look Jen couldn't read. "Well, I can't really wear what I'm currently wearing out of here, can I?" "Dude, I wasn't trying to give you a hard time or anything. I think this stuff is nice." Jen didn't think this stuff was nice at all. It was creepy, like some kind of doll outfit. And what was up with the makeup and the dog collars? She wanted to ask what had happened, but she didn't. Maybe because she knew the answer, whatever it was going to scare the crap out of her and change the way she looked at her little sister forever. Maybe because it just seemed like such an out-of-place question in the moment. Maybe because she thought there was a chance that Bobby Lee would break if she talked about it. "The dressing rooms are going to be dark," she said. "No, they won't. The tops are open," Bobby Lee countered. "Really?" "Yes." Yeah, okay. Let's get you some new shit, dude. Let me just tell the guys what the plan is." Jen walked over to the guys and tried to communicate with her eyes that Bobby Lee was okay, but not okay. Maybe really not okay. Jimmy touched her hand, and she didn't pull away, at least not immediately. "She wants to change her clothes." "Okay, that seems pretty reasonable." "Do you think anybody else is here?" Jimmy asked. "Nobody in particular?" "No, but that doesn't mean that there isn't. Obviously, we weren't alone before and we thought we were," Cooperman said and shot Ace a look, making it clear that he held the young man personally responsible for dropping the ball on this one. "Don't let us out of your sight, but maybe, The implied instructions to follow at a distance were directed at all of them, but it was only Ace who answered. "We got it." "Thanks." Jen went back to her sister, who without a word headed off towards the dressing rooms. The guys followed, but kept their distance. Jen checked back over her shoulder several times, wishing one of them could somehow signal to her what she should say or do. But even if they could have sent some kinds of message, they didn't know how to deal with what had happened to Bobby Lee any better than she did. At the dressing room, Jen moved in as if she was going to enter the little room with her sister, but Bobby Lee stopped her. The little girl had been right. The rooms were all open at the top, and the skylights actually did light them just fine. "I'm okay," Bobby Lee said. "I know, dude, I'm really okay," she said. And Jen felt tears welling up in her eyes and a sob climbing slowly up her throat. "I'm not," Jen said. "Can I just come with you, dude, please? I'm afraid to..." She didn't know what the end of that sentence was. "Afraid to let you out of my sight again," she guessed. Or maybe it was "afraid to not be there when you need me again." But Bobby Lee didn't care what the rest of the sentence was. At the moment, she didn't really care about anything except being somebody else as quickly as possible. And if that meant her sister had to watch her metamorphosis, well, that was just fine with her. Whatever. When the girls exited the dressing room, Bobby Lee was decked out in her first attempt at the Lolita goth look she'd carry through her coming teenage years and then some. Except for the dyed black hair, which Jen would do her best to fix that night when they got to camp, though they'd never be able to get all the original red out. The risque clothing and dark makeup made the folks back at camp uncomfortable. Well, that and the axe that never left the little girl's side from that point forward. But the only part of the whole thing that bothered Jen were the 2 dog collars her sister insisted on wearing around her neck from that point forward. Bobby Lee never volunteered what had gone down in the back of the superstore. She never offered any explanation of the elements of her outfit, and in spite of her fear and curiosity, Jen had never asked. In fact, she made sure nobody else ever tried to talk about any of it with her little sister either. Jennifer Kessler had first-hand experience in keeping demons locked away, and she respected the practice. All right. So now I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. But I guess if anybody has any questions. Sure. Both Jennifer and Bobby Lee practice TM, and their uncle Alan is the one that taught it to him. Jennifer has used it as a tool to help control the berserker that comes out, and that's the gist of it. I started it in January and finished the rough draft in
So while you were in Maine.
Yeah, started in Maine. That's why the beginning of the book is set in Maine. And then we moved here, and suddenly it became a book set here.
Okay, that's good.
I always thought I did, but my experience with writing is that you outline and make a big plan, and then you sit down and start typing, and your characters don't listen to a single thing that you planned and have their own idea of what the story is. And you fight them a little bit, but for the most part, they tell you what the story is. Or whatever part of the subconscious that they make up tells you what the story is. I do a lot of writing at night after everybody goes to bed. That's like my own quiet time. But also, scheduling wise, I have afternoons kind of blocked out to work on this kind of stuff. So a lot of the writing was done in the afternoon by necessity. It comes in fits and spurts, like the actual writing. Most of it is just doing it in your head and then sitting down and writing something that had nothing to do with what you had in your head. Yeah, it's like watching the best TV show you never knew you had, because it keeps you keep thinking you know where it's going to go, and then it goes somewhere else, and you're like, oh, well, how are they going to get out of this? And then you're like, oh, well, I have to figure that out. So that's the fun part, I guess. Oh, yeah, I've been dark for a long time. I remember when I graduated from high school, I don't know why, but I read some poem that I had written to all the family members that had been gathered there, and great-grandpa Scholzel pulled me aside and said, you really think that kind of dark, horrible stuff? So it's been there since high school, at least. And it sounds really dark, and it certainly is dark. And this is not a particularly dark passage in the book, just to give you a scale. This is middle ground. But there's also a lot of not dark stuff in it. I like to think it's fairly balanced, but I'm a little biased. I was working in Los Angeles in the film and TV industry for a long time, and we had sold our house and moved to Maine, and then were not particularly happy in Maine, so we were contemplating moving here, and I was trying to build an app for a phone that proved way beyond my technical abilities to do by myself, and I really needed to kind of find an outlet for my creativity that would let it not need other people's permission to do it. Film is a very collaborative medium, and there's a lot of people and it also costs a lot of money, which is why there's a lot of people involved. But it's very hard to do anything in the film world, but it's very easy to write a short story or a story by yourself in the dark room. So it kind of just started off as me being like, well, I've always liked writing. I've written a lot of scripts. I have a lot of ideas for good stories. Maybe I'll try this one as a novel, because I needed to have a purpose in my life. And it was amazing how fast it was. Why was I ever doing anything else? What have I been doing with myself for the last 35, 40 years? I am the publisher. I created my own company to publish it, Wilson Boulevard Press, for people. We know that's the street we live on. So, and as I was marketing it, I actually ran into some other friends from LA that were in a similar position of really wanting to do something creatively and had written books and were going through the whole, should I try to get an agent, should I try to get traditionally published, or should I self-publish thing? And it was really fun to be like, well, here's what I did, and you can do it too, because it's really easy, and empower them to take those steps forward. I don't know what that has to do with Wilson Boulevard Press, but segue. No. Yeah, the cover is, it is Bobby Lee.
She's older.
She's older because I have no control over what stock footage I can find models for. There'll be at least 4 more books, but unless massive amount of people start reading it, it's going to take a while to get all 4 out. But there's at least another 3 more, story-wise. Maybe more, but definitely 3 after this one. Oh, we've done Facebook and put ads up, and I feel like marketing is like a big black hole, and you just dump your money into it, and then maybe something happens, but you can never connect the dots. So when we did the push to get it the book in people's hands so people would read it, you make it free because nobody wants to take a chance on an unknown writer if they have to pay for it. And it did really well free. I don't know what that means, but it was way up in the top 10 on Amazon for free books when it was free. Both times it got made free, and the second time I didn't even tell anybody it was free. I just made it free. So that doesn't translate into it being anywhere high ranked at all when it's $2.99 as a Kindle edition or whatever it is. So I don't know anything about marketing. I'm making this up as I go along. But I'll probably put this up on YouTube or something, and I don't know. And if anybody has any ideas, I am open to suggestions. I have, and we didn't do Comic-Con, but I have a zombie horror movie that we made independently, and we went to a couple the comic book conventions and marketed that there. The problem is that it's really expensive, and the return is so questionable that it's really hard to justify shelling out the thousands of dollars it takes to get yourself down there, buy a booth, set it all up, and do all that. At some point, it's word of mouth. The thing that will sell a book is always going to be word of mouth. Like, that's what makes people buy books, is somebody else telling them that it was good. So that's ultimately all we can do, is try to get people to read it. It doesn't play, there's no BDSM in the book. It's just the experience that this little girl has in Walmart that causes her to change her whole self-image is she's going off of what she has access to information-wise to rebuild who she is, and that kind of empowering dominatrix sort of personality is something that she's gravitated to. This is not in the book at all, but since I wrote it, I can tell you all this. But it's more. It's more the emotional tones that go into BDSM that is inherent in her psychology than it is anything actually like happening like that in the book.